time, so I did my best.
Okay. Okay, we are recording.
Okay, welcome to the League of Women Voters Central Kane County Criminal Justice Program. Tonight we will be dealing with 3 questions on the state study, investing in communities, bias in the criminal justice system, and data collection and transparency. And I will start off with question number 1, but first I would like to say real briefly that our current state criminal justice position is 25 plus years old. And I urge you all to take a look at it on on the state website, look at where we stand, and you will see that it is really small. And it does not cover many areas at all. But 25 plus years ago, it was adequate for where we were at as a league, and also where the general population of the United States stood. A lot has changed in 25 plus years, and so we have really expanded upon it. So bear with us as we go through the different steps. And as I said, I will start with investing in communities to reduce crime and violence. The consensus question is, to reduce crime and violence, should there be investment in underserved and or impoverished communities? And we have a pro and a con, and excuse me, losing my voice here. First, I would like to say that we have no existing position on investing in communities. And so we really started from scratch on this one. But we used the Illinois State Commission on Criminal Justice and Sentencing Reform as our beginning Bible. It was nowhere near our ending Bible, but at least it gave us a little outline to follow. So when the commission was reviewing information, they were faced with the fact that nearly half of all prisoners released from prison and returning to their communities would be reincarcerated within 3 years. And so the commission began to take a look at where and what the prisoners were released to. They looked at the communities. They used all the information that they could get from the Illinois Department of Corrections to get demographic data on who, what, when, where, and why of the prison system. And this is what they found. Prisoners routinely have less than 12 years of schooling. Inmates entering the Illinois Department of Corrections are administered the TABE test, which is the test of adult basic education. And it was found that they have really low levels of literacy, score low on tests, and in FY 2019, 12,685 inmates were given the TABE test, and 51.62% scored lower than 6.0. That means that they read at the 6th grade level or below. Can you imagine that? An adult reading at the 6th grade level or below? They often have a history of drug addiction, mental illness, violence, or impulsive behavior. And in fiscal year 2016, about 27% of the inmates incarcerated were receiving mental health services while in prison, and half or more had been assessed as needing substance abuse treatment. So if this is the profile of those locked up and being released to the community, they didn't get there they didn't get that way in prison. They arrived there that way. So how did it happen? Where did it come from? So let's take a look at the communities and what they offer or what they don't offer. Later, we'll talk about what happens in prison when someone is incarcerated. But now let's talk about some preventive measures. Despite the large percentage of people from Cook County within the Illinois Department of Corrections, the overwhelming majority come from and return to a small number of impoverished, mostly African American communities and neighborhoods. on Chicago's south and west sides. Cook County provides almost half of Illinois Department of Corrections population. And what I'm about to say is something we all know, but in these times, I think it needs to be said again. Neighborhoods, the lack of legitimate economic opportunity, jobs, is associated with increased crime rates. We all know that, right? How can you convince a 13-year-old making money selling dope on the corner that they shouldn't do it, especially when they are contributing to the care of their family? Especially if dad or mom are formerly incarcerated, also known as ex-cons, and can't get a job because of their record. That's called a collateral consequence to incarceration, not being able to get a job because you have a record. It makes it harder to find housing, healthcare, jobs, and continuing education. And it makes it hard, if not impossible, to reintegrate into society. It becomes cyclical. The dynamic of having a parent as an offender increases the likelihood of that the children will become involved in crime and become incarcerated. Research, as we know, also shows that areas that experience high levels of crime because of our use of over-incarceration changes the attitudes of these neighborhoods. The control on a formal basis, for example, by the police, can damage relationships. We see it now. If you, as a cop, come to my house looking for my brother, whom I love, I probably won't give you information because I don't trust you, especially if I am a person of color. So the neighborhood begins to rely on policing itself. They become less likely to report crimes and cooperate. They change the dynamics of the neighborhood because of this. So where do we begin? How can we sell investing in neighborhoods and communities to others, especially when the crime doesn't impact them personally? It doesn't impact me in Batavia. Does it impact you? How am I going to be convinced that I am my brother's keeper? So let's hear from Xavier. He is part of the We Are Witnesses Chicago program from the McCormick Foundation. So here we go.
You know, I always say that no child's born bad. A lot of friends even joke around like, come on, man, like you had 19 read since 7 vacations by the time you were 13.
Ooh.
Like, how can you say no child's born bad? My name is Xavier McElroy. I'm from the back of the yard in Southside Chicago. I was the kid who was just following the crowd. My home was just very violent, volatile at all times, in fact. And so it became quite natural for me to run to the streets. My game became my greatest strength. Whenever I needed a place to stay because my stepfather was being violent, I knew I had my friends. So as soon as I hit the streets and as soon as my friends became a part of the gang, we had access to weapons. You know, you find yourself wanting to go venture off to see how they live. You want to see how they feel. You want to pick one up. Some friends and myself, we pulled the guns from underneath the porch. We saw this very long 22 Smith West revolver. It looked like a Yosemite Sam gun, like one that you would see in cartoons. We were intrigued by it. My friend was playing with it, spinning the chamber, and within moments, while not realizing the gun was pointing directly at me, the gun went off. Out of my face beneath my left eye. So if you see a small dimple, it's really not a dimple, it's a bullet hole. Blood was rushing out of my mouth, out of my nose. Right then and there, I just knew for a fact that I was going to die. And I remember asking God, why me? Why one of the first questions a police officer that asked me, he said, "Who shot you?" And even though I was laying on what could have been my deathbed, I knew for a fact I wasn't going to tell my best friend. We may have not been the best influences to each other, but we were truly the greatest consolation in each other's lives. I just wanted to the camaraderie we loved. I felt it in the streets with my friends. That particular phase of my life didn't last long. Because at 13, I was already being charged. On this night, I saw an individual turning around the corner. And this individual was Pedro Martinez, who was a 14-year-old kid.
Well, I apologize.
I was 13 at the time. And I remember when he turned the corner, my first thought was he's a rival gang member.
If you want to just stop it, that's okay.
Okay. I
often say I wish I could go back to 51st.
oops, wait a minute. Sorry about that. I need to stop the sound.
Don't come this way.
Sorry, I will say that if you look up the Marshall Project, and we'll send you the link, it's got a number of very good programs, but in a nutshell, Xavier was 13 when he got involved in a situation for which he ended up being sentenced to 25 years at age 14. He was tried as an adult and sentenced as an adult at 14. The incident occurred when he was 13 and he was charged with murder. So he was part of the whole felony murder situation, which I personally am opposed to, but that's just me. Felony murder is a situation where even if you were not the person that pulled the trigger, or if you were not the person that was in the particular area, like Xavier wasn't, he actually pointed out what he thought was a rival gang member, two members of his gang, and basically set up this guy to be murdered. And then after the kid who was 14 was shot and killed, he went back and set the building where the body was on fire at the direction of the gang. So he was sentenced as an adult. And by the time he was 13, he had 17 arrests and had 17 actual convictions as a kid. So I don't know, they were all juvenile offenses. So he was found guilty, but didn't do time like he did with this particular case. He got out when he was 26, and he was able to find his way in prison, which is pretty remarkable in this day and age. Of course, he's been out for 12 years. So back then, Illinois used to actually have programs in prison. He got his associate's degree and he got his bachelor's degree while incarcerated. And when he got out, he did various jobs within the city of Chicago. He worked for the Interrupters. He worked, working on a study at Northwestern University on kids who are incarcerated. And currently he is a deputy director of, now I can't remember the name of who he's a deputy director with, but it's about sentencing. So anyway, he has dedicated his life to working for change on behalf of his 14-year-old victim. Should the children of impoverished neighborhoods have to wait until they are in prison to get help? Community investment, not punishment, is the key to reducing violence. A group called Concerned Citizens of South Central Los Angeles mobilized. They took back the parks from drug dealers, created safe spaces for young people, and provided services to addicts and former inmates. CCS, CLA, and Juanita Tate, the leader, worked with neighbors to build affordable housing, clean up sidewalks, ensure that alleys were no longer used for drug dealing, and trained formerly incarcerated people to do jobs in the neighborhood. Research shows that these organizations can help to bring crime rates down. it also tends to build stronger communities. Summer job programs, programs to clean up abandoned lots, and otherwise keep teenagers and young adults busy helps reduce crime in the neighborhoods. In Chicago, there's a group called Becoming a Man, BAM, which combines after-school sports programs along with behavioral therapy and counseling. It was launched in 2001, and the founder, Anthony Ramirez de Vittorio, created a safe space for young men at Clemente High School. And that was to afford them the opportunities to openly express themselves, receive support, and develop social and emotional skills necessary to succeed. They basically replace the parents. BAM currently serves more than 8,000 kids in 140 schools in Chicago and has since opened in 3 other cities. BAM has 6 core values that are very important to teaching young adults how to survive. The first is integrity. My values equal my actions. I am a man of my word. The second is accountability. I am responsible for the consequences of my actions, whether intended or not intended. I take ownership for what I do and avoid projecting blame. Number 3, positive anger expression. I think this one's very important. I think they're all important, but I think this one is good for working with young adults and teenagers. I learned that anger is a normal emotion that needs to be expressed. How I express my anger is a choice, whether as a savage or as a warrior. Self-determination. I pursue my goals in the face of adversity. I learn to conquer self-defeating thoughts and overcome obstacles. Respect for womanhood. I also like this one. I learn how my words and my actions devalue women, including those I love. I am more mindful and respectful in how I interact with women. I strive to be a self-liberator and not an oppressor. Finally, visionary goal setting. I create a vision for myself of who I am and how I want to be seen in the world. I create a vision that is focused on making my community and the world a better place. I set goals based on my vision and make responsible choices that help me achieve these goals. Let's talk a little bit about Philip, part of the BAM program. At 17,
Patty, can I interrupt you right here? We're at 7:20, so just
Okay.
so that you know, I don't know whether you want to do 20 minutes for each segment or what.
I've just got a couple more minutes.
Okay.
At 17, Philip has lost many of the most important people in his life, including his mother, grandmother, uncle, and niece. His older sister was beaten to death. His father is in prison. Despite his hardships, Philip is a bright student and a promising athlete. His many family tragedies, however, had weighed on him greatly and at times resulted in distress, depression, and failing grades. Wow, you think? In the Becoming a Man program, it has changed the trajectory of Philip's life. Core values such as self-determination have helped him become more aware and verbal about his feelings. Through weekly group sessions and the support of trauma-informed BAM counselors, Philip has learned to calmly deal with difficult emotions, stay focused on school, and has even earned a basketball scholarship. No matter what the circumstances or challenge, we never give up on our kids. BAM offers the support that young men like Philip need to commit to education and achieve goals that lead to success in adulthood. He is now a student at Chicago State University. I have a couple more, but I will stop there so that we can go on to Margie.
If I could make a quick little comment, I don't know whether usually we'll have opportunities for questions or anything, but one thing that came across my desk recently was the fact that, talking about affordable housing available to ex-cons and so on. I think absolutely, I totally agree with so much of what you're saying, but there are some questions, like, for instance, is it okay for an ex-con to be living near a daycare center? But on the other hand, is there any way they couldn't be, because daycare centers are everywhere? Another question is,
They're
What
not a
about,
offender, yes.
yeah, and another question is, what about getting jobs in healthcare or in education or whatever? So there are some serious issues to be addressed as well.
Absolutely.
Did anyone else have any quickie comments before we go on to Margie?
I have one quickie comment. If Xavier had been busted under the law that exists today, he would have not gotten 25 years. He would have gotten a minimum of 45 years, and he would have had to serve 100% of that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's where our law has gone. It's really
Right.
atrocious. And what were the chances of rehabilitation if he had had to live from ages 13 to what is
Right.
45 to 58 in the
Right.
Department of Corrections? And
Yep.
we would have been paying for all 45 years of that too.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Meeting with-
Margie.
Sentencing. Margie.
Oh, and just a comment to Patty before I go into mine. Some of these ex-cons, especially black men, have been given 5 years for busting a headlight.
Right.
You know, so they're no threat to the community, but labeled as an ex-con. So my area is bias in the criminal justice system. There's no existing position. The question is, should there be periodic training for individuals working in the criminal justice system to recognize the implicit racial and ethnic bias in order to more adequately work toward the goal of equal treatment under the law? It is imperative that significant racial disparities be addressed in the justice system. What is implicit bias? It refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect how we look at and judge people. We all have biases, but racial bias is a construct of American society. It is a system problem that has been in existence since the country was founded. Therefore, one should not feel guilty because you were brought up in the system. Our call to action is to change our thinking to help change the system for a more equal, just society. Looking into the history of policing, it was based on overt bias. The original, the first settlers needed to move the savage Native Americans living in peace out west and control the Africans they stole from their country. I would like to read an excerpt from the book Caste to show where the history is. The curse of Ham is now being executed upon his descendants. Thomas R. Cobb, a leading Confederate and defender of slavery, wrote 240 years into the era of human bondage in America. The great architect had framed them both physically and mentally to fill the sphere in which they were thrown. His wisdom and mercy combined in constituting them thus suited to the degraded position they were destined to occupy. And also the book goes into lynching back in the 1920s. It was a big city event, 500 people, even the kids showed up. And it was a big party, everybody bought lemonade and watched these people being lynched. And so it goes all the way back. Embedded in our subconscious is that people of color are more violent and must be punished more than any race. The sad part of history is that it keeps to keep the narrative alive, guns were infused along with drugs into Black neighborhoods to say, I told you so. Families have been destroyed by men, put away for years for minimum violations, and like George Floyd, killed over a $20 bill. A Black individual jumping or bending in the car is more likely to be roughed up by police or even killed than a white man. Because of the court system and prison system, A black man may resist arrest knowing he could get 5 years for a minor offense, even a headlight out, knowing that he will be leaving family behind. I have studied the Catalyst Project, and I found that the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover purposely caused dissent during the 1960s among the blacks to get them to fight each other and tell the white folks, see, we told you so, they're savages. Kind of sounds like the current news reports. When it comes to defunding the police, it really means changing the police. Our police have been militarized with most of the budget going to militarization over community development. Police have become the muscle rather than the protectors. White communities or districts have less police and more community development. Black areas have less community development and more police. I attended Stand Up for Racial Justice webinar. Police brutality of Black people is not a budget problem, but a moral one. Why are people and police so willing to allow or do something to harm others? We have been trained to accept it. Changing the police system and prison system is changing a structure set many years ago. The war on crime must stop. Officers need to have a change of mind as they approach people of color. I have a couple of examples. I talked with a law professor at Loyola who is Black, and he tells me when he drives from Chicago to Florida, he stops in each state to have a certificate made. He brings his teaching degree and his law degree. So when he is stopped by police, he has them because he gets stopped for nothing, but having those, they respect him more. Another incident is a friend of mine, and she had her 2 lovely grandchildren who are teenagers out from Chicago, and they went to the Menards up here in Batavia. And as teenagers, Grandma, you do what you need to, and we'll look around the store. Those 2 great kids were followed by security the whole time. And they're just great kids, so there was no purpose in doing it. My other example, here at Plum Landing, we have a dining room, and 2 girls, one just graduated in nursing, and one is going on to law school, came to me shaking on a Saturday morning. They were out in Aurora, they're old enough to be out 11 o'clock, stopped on a false that your tail light is out. They were scared to death. They said our driver's license were in our purses. We were afraid to move, and they're just sweet kids. But they knew if they jerked around or laughed or anything, that the possibility of them either being arrested or pulled out of the car was high. So those really show that there is bias in policing. Police must go through implicit bias training, as sometimes what they do is an instant reaction to indoctrination about who a Black person is when they are arresting them. A white man can kind of squirm around and they're fine, but a Black man does that and oh, he's going to be violent, so we must subdue him. What was it here? Aligning with this does not mean that we are against policing. You are against the bias and a system that treats people different than other people of color different than others. And that is all I have on that. The con is broad-based training detracts from the work that employees are hired to do, but the system will not change until attitudes change, until the system of policing is when you go into these neighborhoods, you're ready to go to war. And that is their attitude where they can go into a mostly white, peaceful district, and everything is fine. So that's what I have.
I think it was brought home so strongly in Kenosha when we saw the different treatment of the 17-year-old white boy who was armed to the teeth, and he was just walking down the street with nobody saying boo, and actually being told that, well, we appreciate what you're doing. You know, that to me that's a great example of what you're talking about. Other people have suggestions, ideas, reactions.
I know one major concern that I have is the role of the police unions in protecting the police from any sort of disciplinary action, even when they shoot people to death, as happened in our incident here in the Elgin area a few years ago with Cynthia Clements, a young woman who was gunned down by the Elgin police. And the officer who did that shooting was completely exonerated by even though if you Google her name, Cynthia Clements, and watch the video on it, you will see it is cold-blooded murder. He is still working for the police, and what happened was the union protected him, and the internal investigation and the union worked together to protect him, and then the state's attorney, which in this case was Cook County, just deferred to the judgments made by the internal investigation of the police department. That's part of the big problem with bias in policing, is that they police themselves as to whether they are biased.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it would have been any different if it had been in Kane County and it had been reviewed by the Kane County State's
I
Attorney.
rather doubt it. There is such an incestuous relationship between the police and the prosecutors. They support each other's cases. The police are the foundation for the prosecutors' cases. And nobody wants to make the police feel like they can't do their jobs. This is the problem is, are we roping, the police say, you're making it so I can't do my job. You're making it so it's not safe. And other people that everybody else is saying, you are going over the line, and you're doing more than you're supposed to do. You are not a guardian. You are an attacker, a warrior.
On the other hand, recognize that Joe McMahon did prosecute the policeman in the Laquan.
He did.
And so, maybe the Kane County would have been a better deal for them than Elgin.
It's not impossible. I mean, who can say? It's just, I know that, there he was appointed to do that because they couldn't trust anybody in Cook County to do it. Mm-hmm. And he did do a fairly good job on it, certainly.
Yeah.
What I enjoyed today is listening to Al Sharpton, where he said, look at how much information is put out on, like George Floyd or of an Elgin, on the victim. How, they were just wild and awful, and how little information we get on the policeman, how out of balance that is.
Yeah.
And that's why, when I presented, I said it's a system problem more than an individual problem.
I have a personal story.
Oh.
A couple of years ago, I was driving down to Batavia on Route 31 at about this time of night when it was starting to get dark. And there was a black man, I'd say in his 20s, walking down. This is near Fabian Parkway, or, Fabian Forest Preserve on 31. And there was a younger black man walking down the middle of Route 31. And I was like, do I call the police and have him help, or do I stop? I couldn't stop. I'm in the middle of Route 31 with traffic. And I was like, no, I don't call the police, because he might be in more trouble if I call the police than if he gets hit by a car, frankly. I'm thinking he was probably on his way to the train station or something. I don't know. But it really gave me pause. And that was a couple of years before all this other stuff has been going on. And I don't know how many of you saw the latest thing in Rochester, Rochester, New York, with the Chicago man that was suffocated. You know,
Yeah.
unbelievable. He was naked. He couldn't have had a weapon. His hands were handcuffed behind his back. He had a mask over his face because he said he had COVID, so they didn't want him spitting at them. But then they held his face to the pavement, and he died of asphyxiation.
Oh, really?
He had mental illness.
Yes.
And his brother
Yes.
called because he was having a psychotic episode or
Yes.
something, and he was acting really crazy. And so
That
they
doesn't
called the
cause you to get
police.
killed.
Yeah.
He was
I
dead.
think but that does bring up the intersection here with crisis intervention training, which they're working on and trying to get better in Kane County, but there certainly still is a long way to go.
It's
I think what,
huge.
I was at a, part of the change program in Aurora, we had some dialogue, and what's happening now with a lot of these workshops for the disabled clothes, and they're on the street, and the police are having a hard time because they don't know how to help these people. And one woman, her son who is disabled, and he's in his 30s, mentally disabled, got beat up by the police for no reason because they didn't know how to handle him.
Mhm.
But back to Patty's point and her thing, you've got these neighborhoods that are food deserts, so they're not eating well, poor education, no community services. And in Aurora, all the services that are here are away from those areas. And then, you know, infuse them with guns and drugs, and then why don't you behave yourself?
Yeah. Well, before I start my session, I just want to read something real quickly. And this is Congresswoman AOC's full response to the question, what does America with defunded police look like to you? Her response is, the good news is that it doesn't actually take a ton of imagination. It looks like a suburb. Affluent white communities already live in a world where the choice to fund youth, health, housing, etc., more than they choose to fund youth, health, housing, etc., more than they fund police. These communities have lower crime rates, not because they have more police, but because they have more resources to support a healthy society in a way that reduces crime. When a teenager or preteen does something harmful in a suburb, I say teen because this is often where lifelong carceral cycles begin for Black and brown communities. White communities bend over backwards to find alternatives to incarceration for their loved ones, to protect their future, like community service or rehab or restorative measures. Why don't we treat Black and brown people the same way? Why doesn't the criminal justice system care about Black teens' futures the way they care for white teens' future? Why does the news use Black people's graduation or family photos in stories the way they do when they cover white people? For example, Brock Turner, who committed a harmful crime. Affluent white suburbs also design their own lives so that they walk through the world without having much interruption or interaction with police at all, aside from community events and speeding tickets. And many of these communities try to reduce those too. Just starting there would be a dramatically and radically different world than what we are experiencing now. I think that says it all.
It does. That's excellent.
Excellent.
He's one smart cookie. Moving on to data collection and transparency. We currently do not have a position at the state level on data collection and transparency. The consensus question is, are efficient data collection, data sharing, and transparency critical and in an impartial and unbiased criminal justice system? The con is jurisdictions throughout Illinois operate on different computer platforms, operating systems, hardware, and software. To enable them all to communicate with one another would be a major expenditure of time and money. This then could also involve privacy and security issues, with data shared inappropriately. For example, social security numbers. Well, how about that? It's going to cost us money. Currently, Illinois is all over the board with the data we collect, how we collect it, and how easily or not it is shared between agencies that need the information. And there are a lot of reasons to collect and share data. The Illinois State Commission on Criminal Justice and Sentencing Reform, ISCC-JSR, our Bible, expressed concern that data is currently entered multiple times by multiple people, which increases the possibility of error. Just imagine if all of us tried to enter the same thing at the same time, what could happen? I can tell you my typing skills really suck, so, which is one of the reasons I handwrite a lot of stuff. The commission suggested creating the Illinois Data Exchange Coordinating Council, which would create a statewide information sharing network. Pardon me. In the commission report, they outlined that the collaboration, what the collaboration would entail. From my experience working in the state system, I personally shuddered when I read the recommendation to create yet another arm of an agency. But I get it, and I've experienced how difficult it can be to share information. For example, when I was employed, a contractual employee in our agency going from one service provider to another with no break in service, but going from one working location to another working location, like one facility to another background check was required. The systems didn't communicate, and it also required that the person have another drug test. And that's pee in a cup in front of somebody. The example of how law enforcement agencies not sharing information, both on a local state basis and on a state by state level, has really traumatic effect. For example, the Henry Pratt shooting in Aurora. Gary Martin had a previous felony conviction and should not have been issued a FOID card, firearm owner's identification card. When he applied for a FOID card in 2014, he did not reveal that he had a felony conviction in 1995, which would have prohibited him from getting a FOID card. It was for felony aggravated assault in 1995 in Mississippi, another state. He got his FOID card. He subsequently applied for a concealed carry card and submitted fingerprints in order to get it hurried along. And that's when they found out that he had a felony conviction, but he already had a FOID card. He just couldn't get a concealed carry card. They discovered that the conviction was in Mississippi and it did not show up in the databases because his Mississippi state ID number did not appear in the system until after the Henry Pratt shootings. That was more than 2 decades later. And he had pleaded guilty to aggravated assault involving a former girlfriend. State police have been sued by one of the victims who survived the shooting for issuing Martin a gun license despite a previous felony conviction and for failing to make sure that he surrendered his gun when his license was subsequently revoked. The contention is that the state police and the Aurora PD should have been on the same wavelength and should have received the same information at the same time. They didn't. So their computer systems are different, their reporting systems are different. Some believe communication in this particular case could have saved lives. Possibly. The second part of the data information sharing recommendation deals with the keeping of accurate records of arrest, prosecutions, convictions, and sentences that include race, ethnicity, and gender. This would enable our criminal justice system in Illinois to assess disproportionate minority impact within criminal justice. This would also allow the state to identify the disparities and understand the scope and thus enable evaluation of our practices because they vary from one end of the state to the other, from county to county, from municipality to municipality, from city to city. And these would include keeping accurate records on the incident and arrest data. And it requires that the state police and, requiring police to adapt the federally mandated National Incident-Based Reporting System standards. So there's federal standards and we're not doing it county by county, municipality by municipality. And that reports detailed information. It also would require reporting on bond decision, pretrial supervision, and detention data, and involving circuit clerks, county jails, and county probation departments, providing data on pretrial bond decisions, supervision, and custody, including race and ethnicity of those who are subjects of these decisions. It would require jail data. The IDOC Jail and Detention Standards Unit should collect and publish data on the pending charges along with race and ethnicity of those held in county jails pre-trial. This unit should also collect and publish data on the conviction charges as well as the race and ethnicity of those serving a jail sentence. The IDOC has a unit that literally goes from jail to jail throughout the state of Illinois, and they collect information and they do audits, and they also do actual visual checks on it. What kind of data they're keeping now, I have no idea, but they used to have to keep pretty detailed information. Charging, court dispositions, and sentencing data. Circuit clerk, court clerks, state's attorney's offices should report complete and timely data on all charging, case dispositions, and sentences to the Illinois Criminal History Record Information System as required by law. I don't know, Kathy, do they do that?
Not really. It's very slipshod. I mean, at least as of 5 years ago, that's when I was last involved with it. And the disparities as a result of it are enormous. For a long time, I mean, I would tell people, if you're going to kill somebody, do it in Cook County. You can get a much better sentence in Cook County. If you did it in DuPage, you were sunk. You were on the dark side of the moon.
Yeah. Diversion data. Diversion program administrators, including law enforcement, state's attorneys, probation departments, task, Adult Redeploy Illinois, and other program operators should collect and publish data on the use of diversion programs by the race and ethnicity of the individuals in pretrial and post-trial programs. Probation outcomes, including revocation data, should be collected and published on outcomes, including revocations and terminations by race and ethnicity, and admissions and exits to IDOC. IDOC should continue its current practice of collecting and publishing corrections population statistics by race and ethnicity. Why should we collect all of this data at every level? Why should it be shareable and published? Well, transparency at every level is important to ensure best practices are followed and treatment of individual offenders is being done on an equitable basis, regardless of race and ethnicity. This is a way to help ensure that there are checks and balances within the system. As Kathy said, when I used to take my classes on tours of institutions, we would go to Stateville, and I would tell my students before we went in the front gate, there's one inmate in Stateville Correctional Center who actually admits guilt, and he works in the soap factory, and he has been there forever and ever, amen. And we're gonna talk to him. And so when we would get there, he would talk about the fact that he was 19 when he committed his crime and that he did it in DuPage County. And he said, if I had been in Cook County, I would have been out 15 years ago. And I used to think he was crazy. And then I started looking at the statistics, and boy, don't commit a crime in DuPage County, because especially if you're a person of color, because you're shit out of luck. So I think it's very important that the systems communicate with each other. And unfortunately right now they don't. And one of the arguments is that it's costly. But when we take a look at the way we do business, I think that we're finally coming to a point in criminal justice, even though I considered myself a professional 35 years ago, where they're looking at criminal justice as more of a profession than they ever have. And I think that that means that maybe people on the outside think that we ought to be held accountable as professionals to do professional work at a professional level. So that would be
Wonder
the,
also whether they wouldn't save some money if they had better or more consistent reporting. Like you said, you had to do repeat testing, repeat clearances. It seems to me that it's possible to make a case that money would be saved if there were better data.
well, that's one of my points that I was going to make in investing in communities, because it's really hard to sell a neighborhood that is not impacted by crime
Right.
into spending money for those communities that do have high crime rates. But one of the things that you're going to hear when I do IDOC is about how much it costs to incarcerate someone. And while the average is $23,000 a year, just think how many kids could go to college and you multiply that by 44,000 inmates. That's $23,000 a year by 44,000 inmates. That's a whole bunch of money. And I don't think my calculator would even go that high. That's because it's from when Maggie was in 3rd grade. That's the calculator I use. Anyway, the way to convince people that are against investing in communities is to talk about how their taxpayers' tax dollars are now being spent. And if you knew that the cheapest prison in Illinois cost $17,000 a year, but the most expensive prison in Illinois cost in excess of $500,000 a year, you'd say, where is that money going and why are we spending it on people? Especially when we're not providing any kind of programs or rehabilitation when people are incarcerated. So it's cyclical. So, end of soapbox.
Well, I was going to say recidivism is expensive. You know, if you don't address any of the problems and find any solutions, you know, that I don't know the statistics out at IYC, but I do know that the director of tutoring would say, well, he's back. Well, you know, so-and-so, he's back. And remember that guy you worked with last year? He's back. And, you know, and I kept thinking, ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. If we had put money into the communities, because these guys are lost. They go right back into the communities.
Yep.
Where they have this same network that's going to lead them astray. You know, and so here we are just adding more money and
Yep.
more money, rather than like, it's like people saying defund the police. I don't like that term. It's reallocate resources so that you get the professionals in there who can provide a solution. You know, it's fair for the police to go in and do the mental health counseling, you know, when they're trying to figure out what is wrong with an individual. They need a mental health
Push the space bar.
adjunct to
Yes.
You
be.
have to, oh, you're unmuted.
Yep.
Leona, I applaud everything you've just said, everything, and it's a huge problem. This I read in one of the many things that I've read in the last couple of weeks. Somewhere in Europe, it takes a policeman an average of 3 years to be trained. It's basically, you know, almost a college degree in being a policeman. And I think the average in the United States is something like 6 months. These guys are just untrained and poorly educated. And, but my God, it's such a huge problem.
Just kind of speak up a little bit. I'm off mute. Can you hear me there?
Yeah.
Hold on.
The community, so you got to specify communities. There was a great presentation like this a couple weeks ago. League of Women Voters Palatine did a program with the chief of police of Oak Park. Their department, all of them have bachelor's degrees and half of them have graduate degrees. And he's a young man and he's very invested in making it a professional thing. And as did our sheriff out here, very invested in that. So it does vary a little bit by spots, and there are some police who are coming along. So it kind of self-defeating to, you know, paintbrush all of the police. We want to be careful not to.
Except, did you see what happened in Oak Park 2 nights ago
No,
at the mayor's?
Example.
You know, I mean,
no.
bad. It's, yeah, unfortunate that the people expect instant change.
Right.
And, you know, to play the devil's advocate, Patty, I can hear people saying, we've invested millions and millions of dollars into these poor communities. And what do we get? People killing each other week after week after week. I know that's not the answer, but that's the kind of response you
Oh, sure.
get. And I don't have a good answer to that.
Well,
I mean,
I'm
it
not
takes,
convinced.
it takes generations. It doesn't
Yeah.
happen in 2 or 3 years.
But how are they investing? Because you've got
Well, I
food
don't know.
deserts. You've got food deserts in those communities. You
Right.
know, you've got obvious holes that truly need the investment.
Right.
Well, and I know at IYC recently, and I don't have statistics or anything. It was just kind of scuttlebutt. You know, they would put out information saying that they needed workers, they needed guards, they needed people to be hired, and it made it sound like they were looking for social workers and they were looking for counselors and that. So people were applying, but when they got into the job, it was prison guard.
Well, they now require in the Department of Juvenile Justice, they have changed that. When they became the Department of Juvenile Justice, they went from just having someone with a high school diploma and age 18 to requiring security staff to have a college degree. And so, I mean, that's the place that I retired from. And I was in employee services and did a lot of the recruitment and hiring. And we also recruited and hired with the Illinois Department of Corrections, Adult Division. So it was really interesting because you had one.
But what I'm saying is what the recruitment brochures, you're frozen.
Lona,
so
you're cutting up there.
Lona's frozen.
Well,
Yeah.
I wasn't, okay,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't even have, what I'm saying was when they were recruiting, it sounds like when they were recruiting, they were talking about, we need your degree in counseling or your degree in social work or whatever. But when those people would be hired, then suddenly it was like, well, we need you mostly just to maintain a lockdown.
Mhm.
And so it was disappointing.
The
for
way they were used was
Right.
different than what they
it was
thought they were gonna do.
disappointing for
Yeah.
people who were hired because they
Yeah.
weren't able to use the skills that they thought they were being hired for.
Right.
Yeah, which I think points to just having a degree doesn't necessarily mean that that you're qualified for any job. And
Oh,
and coming
true.
back to a point Patty made a while ago, that it really depends so much on who's leading the institution and
Exactly.
the atmosphere that they've created.
I got to
One thing
spend
that's kind of
time,
interesting is that along the line of what Lona was saying, I am friends on Facebook with a lot of my former coworkers from St. Charles, and there will be one of the former kids, and I say kids tongue in cheek, that were students there, and they're on the front page of the Trib or the Sun Times, and they pass it around and they say, oh, you remember him from Roosevelt, or do you remember him from, So unfortunately, they continue on into adulthood, which is sad.
I wanted to share, I got to spend time with Tom Dart, the Cook County Sheriff. I spent 4 hours with him. And I liked his idea. He said, I'm not running a hotel that I want repeat visitors. What can I do to have them not come back?
Right.
And also, I went to a very conservative group with Ron Haim. And he was presenting his program for Kane County. And I had quite a conversation with him because the room dropped when he said, I want to do things to put them back in the community. That room just dropped because you're going to do what? You know, and I could just feel it, but Ron was able to somehow bring him back, but I was just amazed at the attitude in that group.
92% of the people incarcerated are released. So,
Yeah.
and it ends up being in excess of 30,000 a year in Illinois because there are that many going into the system. So we need to take a look at who's in there. It's ridiculous and it's costly and it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. So when we talk about prisons, we'll talk about what they're doing in other countries.
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind is that there are a number of other parts of this study, and I think it sounds like each time we address it will be, you know, intersecting with, because there's a lot of problems that interconnect. So we will be coming back to these. So we've hit the magic hour. Does anyone have any what final word of wisdom, Margie?
When I was going back to study the history of policing, do you know we were the very first country in the entire world to sort people when they got off the boat? You know, the white folks go here, the black folks go here, the Irish over here. The countries did not do that. We were the ones that started that.
I believe that.
But the good thing is that felons can vote in Illinois after they're released. So.
But Margie, you have to remember that there weren't a lot of boats going to Europe. The boats were coming from Europe. So there weren't a lot of folks on boats going to France or going to England or going to Sweden or whatever. You know, the majority of the boats were coming to the New World, to the Americas, both North and South.
So when you got off the boat in France, you weren't sorted.
Well, we don't know that for sure.
Well,
There's one thing that's not related to this.
Right.
Next Wednesday and Thursday, we have our Kane County forums that will be YouTubed and BATV'd from 5 to 9. They're going to be semi-virtual at Batavia City Hall. On Wednesday, we have 4 Kane County board districts, and then we have the Kane County State's Attorney's race. On Thursday, we have, who do we have? Circuit Clerk, 16th Judicial District, and Kane County Board Chair. Then we also have a 2-minute splurb from the Recorder of Deeds on Wednesday because her opponent is not going to be there. And we have a 2-minute splurb from, what is he, the auditor, Kane County Auditor. He'd kill me if I didn't remember. I'm telling you, looking for these people is like herding cats because they don't have sophisticated Facebook pages and campaign managers, and nobody's phone number is listed anymore. So you are literally messaging people on Facebook in their private accounts and hoping like hell they respond to you. Then on the 24th of September, we are going to have the 50th Illinois State Rep District. We're going to have this, if Keith Wheeler responds. We're going to have the 65th State Rep District if Dan Ugasti responds. We're going to have the 49th State Rep District. Both of them have responded. And the 25th State Senate District. So we are covered for next Wednesday and Thursday and Thursday the 24th. Then we are also part of the 6th Congressional District Zoom forum on September 21st at 7 p.m. And we are part of the 14th Congressional District Zoom thing on forum on Saturday, September 26th at 4 p.m. So.
And one additional is that on September 17th, that Thursday, will be part of a webinar with Ralph Marteri talking about the fair tax. So the next time we're going to be coming back to the criminal justice study will be in October, on October 1st. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you then.
Thank you. Bye.
We will get links